world is hot.
Being shared.
No, I literally, I Snapchat with my friends, but just like,
Then I also feel
don't look at your accounts, don't look at your accounts, don't look at your accounts.
gender
really dark right here. Do you find that? It's really dark.
so. But
Yeah, you're working. The lights are turned on.
I think they are. I think it's
Funny.
funny.
You've got like 4 straight glasses, right? And then maybe can I put your board in?
yeah.
No, I'm not saying to drive. What's funny is there's no straight. It's not.
Maybe they switched up their light bulbs or something.
It's kind of and
Yeah, just so
That's
the
There's
rock
sometimes
does
where I'm
seem
like,
dimmer.
hey, I don't want my people. You can't like, you can't just say that's all I
This is now I'm going
Well,
to
no,
text
but
me.
it's-
So I guess I need to go text somebody.
What, you want me to, I can convey whatever you need.
I just, that he's just about, he's going to be a little late joining me, but he'll probably be fine.
like, wait a minute, you know what I mean? Like, and
He said
it would almost be. I don't want that to become. I don't want it to become overly identity politics. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we're checking each box in
But
some
it's
way.
not irrelevant. You know?
Right, yeah.
You're an attorney, so you might be
I know.
We're all set for. I could have been posing as you.
Not that I'm saying like you have to come to me.
Good evening, and welcome to our April 3rd, 2025 meeting. I'm Dave Schneider, Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. At least I think that's who I am. Anyway, we're starting a meeting about what, 7:02, 7:03?
7:02.
Great. And we are live streaming the meeting on NVTC's YouTube channel. Please remember to speak up so our listening audience can hear us. Our board administrators confirmed we have an in-person quorum. A special thank you to all the commissioners. This is a particularly busy time of year in state and local government, so thanks so very much for your active participation, not only in these commission meetings, but in the various committees we have. And a special thank you to all the members of the public that are listening to our meeting tonight. So thanks to everyone for joining us. So we have a request for electronic participation. DRPT Director Robinson is requested to participate virtually from Richmond under the provision that she resides over 60 miles from the meeting location. Can I have a motion to approve Director Robinson's request to participate remotely?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Director Robinson, anything you want to add to that? No? Okay, good.
Thank you.
Motion's been made and seconded. Just a minute. You can thank us in just a minute. Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Now you can say thank you. Director Robinson.
Thank you very much.
And thanks a lot for all that you do day in and day out. You've been great to work with. Thank you. Just a couple opening remarks. Nick Donahue, who someone who we known for many years and have the highest respect for, will discuss with us the latest on DMV moves. NVTC staff will be providing the commission with an overview on microtransit, something of growing interest in a number of our jurisdictions. VRE will be providing its annual orientation to remind us of the role that this commission plays. Now, Kate, have we received any comments from the public?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Chair. We did receive a comment earlier today from a gentleman from Fairfax County who is encouraging the commission to be focused more on funding public transit versus highways. And I know this comment was actually provided to all the commissioners a little bit earlier today.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank this commenter in particular, everyone around this table, all the staff, all the people that are here tonight are absolutely committed to public transportation for the benefit of our citizens, for the benefit of our economy, for the benefit of our climate. So I want to thank you very much for your comment, and we take it very, very seriously as witnessed by the constant work on this by every member of the commission and our staffs. So we have last month's minutes before us. Can I have a motion to approve the March 6th minutes?
So moved.
Any comments, any discussion? Well, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Yes.
Yes, one abstention, two
Just a minute,
abstentions.
Mr. Representative Evan, okay?
So we're down to two abstentions. Can we get down to one? No, we're two.
We weren't here.
Okay.
We had a
we're two.
budget.
Okay, thanks a lot. That item passes with just two abstentions. Now, the next item on the agenda is something that is of passing importance to this commission. That is the Metropolitan Washington Area Transit Authority. We have the Vermont board members Paul Smedberg and Matt Letourneau here to give us their report. And thank you both so very much for all the work that you do for the public in this region. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep. For everyone, we have a relatively brief report this month. We do continue to make progress with the WMATA budget and the MD moves. First, we want to highlight some recent ridership data. You've likely heard by now that it bears repeating that last Thursday we had our first million trip day since 2020, with over 600,000 trips on rail and 400,000 on bus. On top of that, we hit over 700,000 rail trips this past Saturday as tourists went to view the cherry blossom and other events that were happening downtown, which was the second busiest Saturday in the system's history behind Barack Obama's inauguration, and the busiest day since 2019. We've also seen 47 consecutive months of year-over-year ridership growth. And now I'll turn it over to Matt to discuss the budget.
Yeah, so with the positive ridership trends, we also continue to see positive budget trends. The board is close to approving the FY26 budget. We will vote on the final budget on Thursday. It's possible there could be some amendments from board members, particularly on the capital budget. We're still having discussions about that. However, management brought to the board a revised operating budget that lowered the jurisdictional subsidy by $19 million. That was really reflective of some of the strain that we understand our partners are feeling, obviously concerns with the federal government, the federal workforce, but also in many of the jurisdictions during this year's budget process. So we were able to, now that we've had the Better Bus Network implemented for a while, there are some adjustments that we can budget for that will save some money related to scheduling and deadheading time. We are reducing station manager staffing in a small number of stations during late night and weekend periods. I don't believe any of those stations are in Virginia, but they're basically stations that very clearly serve a working population, such as I believe Judiciary Square is one of them, where the second entrance received almost no traffic after work hours. So we're going to remove the station manager there, so there's some savings there. We are deferring the extension of Yellow Line trains to Greenbelt and 50% Yellow Line trains to Greenbelt until December. And then there are some additional technology enhancements that are management actions that they are seeking that the general manager feels confident will result in some savings. So I'm sure everybody will appreciate a slightly lower bill. Why don't I'll talk about the banning thing and then I'll turn it over to you. So another thing to mention, and it didn't really get probably as much attention as it did the first time the board discussed it, but the board approved a new banning policy. This is really targeted at repeat and egregious offenders on the system that are causing harm to customers and to employees. So unfortunately, we have it's almost an identified population of, I think they told us about 100 or so individuals. The way that the justice system treats a lot of these offenses, the majority of them are indecent exposure. And an arrest is made, but it's a misdemeanor. And the individual who's arrested frequently will then return to the same location, and in some cases will be arrested for the same offense on the same day in the same location. The criminal justice system has just been really inadequate in terms of dealing with these things. So we did a sort of review of other transit systems, and we were really unique in the fact that we didn't have what is essentially our own trespass policy. You know, we are the owners, so to speak, of the system. Obviously, it's open to the public, and it should be, but if somebody's really behaving egregiously on the system, then we should have the ability, and now we do have the ability to tell them that we're sorry, but you can't be here. So under the policy, somebody who commits a sex offense or assault will be banned for 45 days for the first offense, 90 days for the second, and a year for the third offense. This policy will go into effect on June 2nd. There is an adjudication and appeals process if an individual feels that they have been unfairly banned from the system or proposed to ban from the system. So there is a process in place where somebody can appeal that. But we really think that we could significantly reduce the number of incidents just with this policy because it is a relatively small number of people who are committing these offenses.
One other thing with that, the thing that I think struck most of us, it wasn't offenses or aggressions just to our customers, but it was employees. And it's really a safety issue, not only for our customers, but for our employees. So the numbers are practically equal when it comes to offenses or aggressions toward employees. And in fact, in some cases, maybe even more aggressive and more concerning. So, that's, another reason why we did the research and took the steps we did. So two things real quick. Looking ahead, we're going to do a deep dive with staff on rail automation. We've got a pilot going on the Red Line right now, so that is continuing. I know there's been a lot of conversations around automation and advanced signaling, especially with DMV moves. So this work session will also offer some insight into those details, and we'll provide an update next month on that. Matt and I also wanted to address, because we've been getting some questions on this, the continuing resolution that's going through the Senate or the Congress right now. Passed the House, passed the Senate. There was a bill brought forward by Senator Schumer to address the district's budget issue. There was the proposal in the House version of that continuing resolution that would require $1 billion budget cut within a 6-month period for the district. A lot of people have asked how that would impact the MATA. In effect, it will not. The money's still there, and as Matt and others know, that they're required by the compact.
Home rule.
They're required to fund WMATA. So we're sort of mindful of what's happening, but sort of have a sense of security in some way. I hate to put it that way, but any cuts or efficiencies would definitely be appreciated by the district moving forward. Because they will have to deal with it now. Hopefully, the House will address. They were supposed to potentially address that bill this week, but I don't think. They're not taking any votes this week.
After the proxy.
Yeah, after the proxy, yeah. So we don't know if they will. If they don't, then the district will have to cut $1 billion within 6 months, which is really, quite significant. The mayor has put off introducing her budget until a determination on this bill is made. So it's sort of in limbo for them right now, but we are moving forward, and they are comfortable with where we are at right now. So there we go. Interesting times.
Yeah. Okay, do commissioners have any questions for, we'll call it, okay, not seeing
Might be a first.
Just at our May 1 meeting, we expect the WMATA general manager. I know there's several other questions, but we move forward.
Great.
And board chair Valerie Santos. I know the meeting of our commission, so we will welcome them, and we much appreciate the work that they're doing. Next, so again, not seeing any questions on the WMATA report, we'll turn to the chairs of the WMATA committee and the legislative and policy committee. The chair of NVTC's legislative and policy committee, Ken Gavieri, will give us a report. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While the committee did not meet last month, our legislative and policy committee update tonight covers a lot of territory. We will hear from our legislative liaison, Amy Pearl-Seibert, to provide a General Assembly update on the reconvened session and the governor's vetoes and actions on the budget. We will then hear from DMV Moves Facilitator, Mr. Nick Donahue, who will provide the commission with an update on the last task force meeting and the direction of that regional body of work. Senator Evans, the chair of SJ28, will then provide a look ahead for the SAFE for the year for the work of that subcommittee of the General Assembly. Lastly, we'll hear from the executive director, Ms. Kate Tice, on some potential changes to how statewide transit operating and capital funding are allocated in the federal update. So now I'd like to turn it over to our legislative liaison, Ms. Amy Pearl-Seibert, to provide a General Assembly update on the reconvened session, which was held on April 2nd. Ms. Seibert.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here tonight. I don't have much of an update to give that is directly related to transportation. So just for everybody to know, there was nothing debated yesterday that addresses transportation issues or transit. So that was good. We actually didn't have anything that we were following. The governor had made no changes to the WMATA budget item, and so that was still in the budget, and we had no concerns about that. So obviously it was a really long day yesterday on the floor. They met in the special 2024 session and also in the veto session of 2025. It started at noon and didn't finish till 8:30 last night. So it was quite a long day. The governor had made 205 budget amendments to the budget. He had made 150 amendments to bills and had vetoed 160 bills. So they had a lot to go through. They ended up debating about 13 of those vetoes on the floor, even though none of them were overturned. And then they talked quite a bit about all the amended bills that happened yesterday. We have about 30 days now to see what's going to happen. So all those bills that were amendments were not adopted were sent back to the governor. He has obviously the option to either sign, not sign, and then become law, veto those bills. And the same thing with the budget. So again, like I said, he has 30 days from yesterday to do that. So we'll be anxiously looking at whether he signs the budget, and then we get to move on. So I'm cautiously optimistic that will happen. But happy to answer any questions, anything specific. Obviously, the senators and delegates who I think are in the room today can provide obviously a lot more color commentary about the floor session yesterday than I can. But happy to answer any questions if you have them. But I know you all have a long agenda today, so that's all I've got.
Thanks a lot, Amy. To any of the members of the General Assembly, first of all, thank you so much for the work on our behalf. It's really amazing what you've accomplished for us. So a big thank you for the work that you do for the entire region and everyone who lives in this region. Do you all, any member of the General Assembly have anything they wish to share, any major points or questions that they want to ask?
It's good to be done.
Yeah, it was a long day. But we did have some victories in the budget. We did get some on the House side, I think in the Senate too, right? Where we were able to override his amendments. So on about 6, I think.
No, 5.
5. So.
One thing to be aware of, though, is that depending on what continues to happen with the downturn or potential downturns in the regional economy based on what's happening across the river, we might be coming back with some suggestions on taking what is arguably an incredibly good budget that a couple of our members, like Senator Evans and on finance and all Delegate Persic on corporations in the House helped craft. One of the best we've ever had. We might have to come back and revisit a lot of that to plug in some really gaping holes in terms of unemployment insurance and education funding, environmental funding, across the board. And so just be aware of that. And it'll all potentially come to a head in September.
Okay, that's important. You said come to head when?
September, probably early September.
Okay. All right, well, please let us know if there's anything that we can do to support your efforts. So, thanks. Any questions for Amy? Okay, not seeing any. Thanks for a great report, Amy. Great work, but especially thank you to all the members of the General Assembly who represent the region. So let me turn it back to Legislative and Policy Committee Chair Aguirre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So NVTC continues to track and participate in efforts to secure long-term sustainable transit funding for WMATA, VRE, and our local transit agencies. After the legislative break, both DMV News and SJ28 will be restarting. This is going to be an active year for both efforts, with their respective boards and subcommittees taking action later this year. Members and staff from both bodies are here tonight to help provide updates to the Commission so we can engage in a timely manner. In January, the Commission adopted a resolution on NVTC's guiding principles for future transit funding, which will guide staff's positioning and engagement with these efforts. So starting with DMV moves, the task force met on Monday, March 24th to discuss updates to WMATA's funding needs, estimated local transit needs, and DMV moves funding goals. As a reminder, DMV moves is a joint effort between COG and WMATA that seeks to establish a vision for transit in the district, Maryland, and Virginia. Also to find cost savings and efficiencies for transit and determine the region-wide transit funding needed to make that vision a reality. SJ 28, on the other hand, is a Virginia General Assembly-led effort that primarily focuses on how to generate revenue to solve Virginia's portion of the transit funding need. Tonight, I'm happy to introduce Mr. Nick Donahue, who is the facilitator for DMV Moves, to provide a more in-depth briefing on the task force progress to date. Mr. Donahue, I see you are with us.
I am. Good evening, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you here. I hope you can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
Spectacular, and I believe the slides will be pulled up here shortly. But as was mentioned, I am the facilitator of DMV Moves. DMV Moves is a joint initiative that was established by COG and WMATA. It started in May of 2024 and will continue through this fall. What we're really focused on at DMV Moves is understanding the funding challenges at WMATA, but also looking at the needs of a lot of the local operators in this region. There's 13 other operators beyond WMATA, and understanding what do we need to have world-class transit in this region. Whenever we talk about DMV moves, obviously WMATA is kind of the elephant in the room, if you will. I think it's really important, if we can move to the next slide, to talk about why are we here. And one of the major reasons we are having this discussion today, and this discussion is mostly focused on capital needs, and I'll get into why that is the case here momentarily, but a lot of WMATA's capital program and the things that we as a region have done collectively over the past 2 decades to help provide increased funding for the state of repair to WMATA system use fixed revenue sources, which is to say essentially they are not keeping up with inflation and they do not grow over time. So as costs have gone up, which was accelerated over the last several years, the ability to use these funds to purchase new rail cars, new buses, and also to undertake track repairs and other needed state of repair is simply kind of gone down in terms of what this buys. But if you go to the next slide, it's also kind of exacerbated by another thing. So we have been using the dedicated regional funding to issue debt since 2019 to help improve the state of repair of the WMATA system, and it has had a significant impact on the size of the average capital program that we have at WMATA. So pre the dedicated funding in 2018, the WMATA capital budget was closer to around $1 billion a year. That is almost more than doubled since the implementation of the dedicated funding in 2018. What unfortunately happens though in the 2028, 2029 timeframe is we essentially run into a cliff because the dedicated funding is flat and fixed, and lose the ability to continue to have a sustainable bond program and issue debt. And so the program, almost kind of year to year, but over a 3-year period, drops by about $900 million and then stays at that lower level moving forward. And what that effectively means for the state of repair of the WMATA system, if nothing is done, is that all of the progress we have made since 2018, which I think is really commendable, and I want to give a lot of recognize the work that the WMATA team has done to put those dollars to use and to improve the condition of the system. We will start to lose that ground, and in about 10 years or less, depending on some forecasts, we'll be back to where we were in terms of the state of good repair backlog before the dedicated funding. I think we all remember what service was like back in the 2015, 2014, 2016 timeframes, and I don't think that's a place that we want to go back to. So if you go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about what the current discussions with the task force have been about potential solutions to address WMATA's funding needs, but also provide some enhancements to improve the service, but also provide more flexibility and cost efficiencies in the future. And so you can kind of see 2 boxes on the screen here. The first deals with reinvesting and modernizing the existing system. So in this, the bulk of this funding deals with addressing the state of good repair of the existing WMATA system. This does not eliminate WMATA's backlog. Very few transportation agencies have a state of good repair backlog of 0, but what it will allow WMATA to do is to lower that backlog from where it is today to a place where we'll have a high level of performance and reliability, and importantly, be able to sustain that level of backlog over time. And then it also addresses some major issues that have been known for a long time at WMATA, but the funding has not been available to address, which is namely replacing WMATA's signaling system. To put the signaling system in perspective, the current signaling system was designed when the rotary phone was the most typical form of phone in the United States. So that was a very long time ago. In case any of you haven't had one in a long time. It also will allow for rail automation, which will help improve efficiency of the WMATA metro system, as well as allow for increases in capacity. On the other side of the screen, you can see there's also a concept about bus priority, which is addressing some issues that we heard a lot from stakeholders in the advisory groups that are part of DMV Moves, as well as task force members, and from a survey of the public, where folks indicated a desire to see increased frequency, particularly on the bus side, to address ridership needs, in a lot of cases also in the off-peak times. And this will be looking at ways to make capital investments to allow us to improve the performance of high-frequency bus routes, while also finding ways to increase service through those capital investments by creating operating savings. So if you go to the next slide, one of the other things that we were talking about originally, and I want to say at this time, we have kind of parked for the time being, though clearly there's a lot of things going on in the region, and we'll clearly be watching, what the impacts of some of the uncertainty coming out of the federal government might mean for WMATA moving forward. But as when we started this process, WMATA was projecting to have an operating deficit in 2028, even with the benchmarking or rebaselining of the operating subsidies that took place last year. Through a number of things, but namely a reoccurring budget savings, some efforts to improve efficiencies and reduce costs, but also increased ridership and revenues, WMATA currently projects that $140 million deficit that they identified last spring will be at 0. Now again, there are a lot of headwinds and other things that are out there that I want to recognize. And luckily, DMV Moves will be continuing into the fall, and so we'll continue to monitor that and understand what, if any, impact those headwinds may have on riderships and this projected operating deficit or lack thereof. And we'll start to update that as we understand and have the situation more clearly as we get more information and data points. This next slide really, I think, is an important slide, and this deals again just with giving you a sense of what happens if we don't take steps to address the state of repair needs in the system, and that's the red line you see on that. Right now, the state of good repair backlog of WMATA is around $4 billion. In the FY 36-37 timeframe, it will creep back up to $7 or $8 billion. That is where we were in 2017 before the dedicated funding, when we had a host of issues related to reliability. There were tons of escalator problems and other things that many in this room, I'm sure, are very familiar with. This black line shows you where WMATA estimates the state of good repair backlog will be with the funding that we talked about on the previous slide. And what you can see here, and I think it's very important, and we looked out over an extended period of time, is that we can reach a sustainable level of performance where the service will be reliable and will meet the needs of customers there. And so this is what that funding helps provide in terms of taking care of our existing system, and importantly, making sure that the solution is sustainable over time so that we're not back here again in 10 years trying to address the state of good repair needs of WMATA. But as I mentioned, we're looking beyond just the state of good repair needs of WMATA and also talking about what are some of the needs when it comes to world-class transit for this region. And the direction we received from the task force on the next slide was to really focus on ways to leverage the existing system. And in that, really the direction was, and again, this was not always unanimous, was not to look at expanding the footprint of the system or major additions of nature, but taking the assets we have and using them more effectively and getting as much capacity out of them as we could. But also while doing that, if you move to the next slide, looking at ways to try and make that service more efficient. So beyond just the state of good repair needs that I talked about, there's two other components that are included in the funding that I showed on slide 4. The first was rail automation, and this was something that would be implemented in conjunction with replacing WMATA's aging signaling system. And what rail automation will do is it will dramatically improve safety on the WMATA system. It will increase the number of trains WMATA can operate in an hour, so it will help address capacity issues, particularly in the core, that WMATA expects to have in the future. And then importantly, it will also help reduce the unit cost of service. And so, to give you kind of an example of this, on the red line, you would be able to run the current service that exists today with 2 less trains. Or said differently, if you paid the same level of operating that you're paying today, you could run more service and more frequent service on the red line for no additional cost. On the bus priority side, we are looking at ways where we can make capital investments, which would be things like bus lanes in certain circumstances, signal priority, queue jump lanes, level boarding, and other things of that nature. Again, with the goal of finding ways to put in place these investments where it will improve the reliability of bus service, it will reduce travel times, and then it will also reduce the cost to provide the service that we have today, which will allow you to increase service without having any increased operating costs on those routes. And the example you see on the slide is the W4 route, which is in eastern Washington, D.C. In this instance today, it takes 20 hours to run the service. If we were to implement the capital investments for bus priority along that route, you would be able to run the same service for 15% less. Or said differently, you could increase service by 15% for the same operating cost of what you have today. You go to the next slide, though, the work groups, or the DMV Moves, excuse me, is also looking at a number of policies that can help improve coordination between different transit operators in this region. And so there's a number of things that have been identified by various task force and work groups over the past several decades about things we could do to improve the customer experience or to potentially find cost savings through joint procurements and other things of that nature. Unfortunately, a lot of cases, those have been kind of recommendations that are put in a report and then they're often not implemented, which is why we're still talking about them. What we've done today is leverage those existing reports, and then we put together working groups with staff from all of the operators in the region to talk about these issues, to try and make sure we actually find a way where these make sense to implement them. So looking at fare integration, looking at ways of improving wayfinding, understanding whether or not there are cost savings or synergies through joint procurement of bus or other fleet management activities. And so we've been working on these and expect to have some report outs in June on kind of action plans on what can be implemented now, what requires some additional work, or what, as we've dug into it deeper, may have some issues that make it not feasible to move forward with. But we do expect there will be a number of items where there are opportunities to kind of make progress and move forward. On the next slide, one of the other things we're doing through DMV Moves is we're also looking at what have we done in the past and where have there been issues that maybe need to be revisited. As some of you know, I was heavily involved in the 2018 effort to provide dedicated funding to WMATA. And one of the things that is very clear to me today as I work on this initiative is when I talk to people about what we expected the funding in 2018 to achieve, I get mixed responses and very, very different expectations for what was going to happen. And so I think it's very important that in this circumstance, we document what it is that we are assuming, what we expect the outcomes to be of any increased investment for WMATA, and that we use that to essentially ensure there's accountability within this new funding regime that would go to WMATA. And so, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that what we're presenting is a sustainable solution, but if for some reason something happens, and in 10 years, you are having a different discussion, hopefully with someone who's not me, on your screen talking about WMATA funding needs, you will be able to say, what did we assume? And if the assumptions we made happened, and there is an issue when it comes to WMATA funding, there should be some very tough conversations with WMATA leadership at that time. On the flip side of that, if you're having these conversations in 10 years and something we all thought was very reasonable today just was wrong and simply did not happen that way, then what we need to do as a region is understand that we made an assumption, that assumption turned out to be wrong, and we need to collectively understand how we want to address that situation. We're also looking at the 3% cost cap to determine whether there are ways to allow that to just to improve how it works and to make sure that it works within the context of the new WMATA funding formulas. And then my last slide, because I'm sure Kate's getting ready to text me and tell me I've gone over time, is we are also looking at local transit needs. And we did a pretty detailed survey of local transit operators last summer and fall. But what we found out through that survey is that many operators have different levels of plans when it comes into the future. And that has kind of impacted our ability to use that survey data to look at and kind of analyze or identify local needs. And so what we're actually proposing at this time on the bus side is that we will use regional service design guidelines that are being developed as a part of the working groups I mentioned 2 slides ago to look at existing local bus service and identify whether or not there are any gaps in that service where there may be opportunities to provide cost-effective service that would have good levels of ridership. And then if there are, identify what it would take to fund those routes. On the commuter rail side, we did do some work with VRE and MARC last summer. That was obviously prior to the announcement by the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority about the acquisition of the Manassas line. And as you all know, that acquisition has a significant impact on what is possible in terms of commuter rail in this region. And so we will be sitting down with MARC and VRE to revise a number of these figures. But in both of these, we will have information in the summer that will be able to be provided as a part of the DMV group's work. And with that, Chair Snyder, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you or others on the commission may have.
Thanks very much, Nick. Those of us who have worked with Nick over many years really appreciate his commitment to the public and his effective public service. Let me start the discussion with a couple key points. It's really important that long-term sustainable funding for WMATA and our other systems be solved regionally. And we appreciate the work of CROG and WMATA accordingly. And we especially appreciate the work of our commissioners, Matt Paul, plus former commissioner and NVTC ally Jeff McKay, and Delegate Mark Sickles especially. We really appreciate everyone who's been deeply involved in these efforts on a day-to-day basis. We've laid out our initial position, and that's Resolution 2552, and it's always close to me, so we're looking to make a wallet-sized version of this so that everybody can carry it around and have it readily available. But that's where the commission came together with a consensus with some general recommendations. So I want to thank everyone involved for the work consistent with those principles. We want to make sure that the outcome of the process provides adequate growth in revenues to meet current and future operating and capital needs for WMATA, VRE, local transit operators in Northern Virginia. We want the funding solution to build upon or perhaps even reducing the existing burden on local and regional revenue sources. I feel strongly that NVTC continues to be a model for distributing existing and any future revenues for WMATA, VRE, and our local systems, continuing the decades-long role of NVTC in managing those transit funds. In other words, here's the table where everybody comes together to work things out and to move forward in our collective regional agenda. Virginia needs to come up with our own revenue solution to match Virginia's funding needs for WMATA, VRE, and the local systems. We look to SJ 28 and our legislative colleagues to help solve that for Virginia. And again, thanks to everyone for facilitating this important effort. We know that there are a lot of uncertainties with our regional economy, so we appreciate the thoughtfulness of the regional dialogue in securing future investments in transit. So I thought I'd lay out a couple of these points and refer again to our resolution. Now it's time, commissioners, what points do you want to make beyond the ones that I've made? Mr. Chair, questions or comments? Yeah, Paul.
Nick, this is Paul Smedberg. Maybe, for everyone's information, could you just describe the 2 work groups that you're doing a lot of work with? The makeup of those groups, I think that would be important for folks to understand. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair Smedberg. And so in terms of kind of the structure of DMV moves, there's the task force, which is chaired by Paul Smedberg as well as Charles Allen, from the District of Columbia, which consists of elected officials, from the DMV region. It is a mix of COG and WMATA board members. They are supported by two advisory groups. One is the Community Partners Advisory Group, which is chaired by Jack McDougall, the director of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. It has all kind of community stakeholders such as business groups, transit advocates, Greater Washington, the universities, and a whole host of other kind of stakeholders who are outside of government, but are interested in kind of this region's economic future, as well as transportation in the region. And then there's also the Government Partners Advisory Group, which is chaired by Brian Hill from Fairfax County, that consists of all of the chief administrative officers from the region, as well as the directors of all of the other transit services, bus, VRE, MARC, that operate in this region. And in these advisory groups, what we are doing is really digging through a lot of the details, having discussions, going back and forth, surfacing questions, and then working through those to then bring back a more refined product to the task force. And so it's been, I think, a lot of healthy discussion at the advisory groups that have allowed us to bring back refined and better numbers to the task force as we've worked through this process over the last 9 months.
Thank you.
Thanks. Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And County Care, thanks again for all your work and leadership on this. I do have one slight concern. I thought this kind of got quashed, this whole local bus consolidation thing, because local bus systems reflect local government values and priorities. There's a reason that we all have our local systems. And I believe at the last DMV Moves meeting, Senator Somerville was pushing for examining a consolidated bus system. I want folks to understand that spending time discussing eliminating local bus systems instead of looking at improving coordination, to me, is a distraction to the bigger issue of sustainable funding. Our local bus systems already complement the WMATA regional system, and we as city and counties created local bus systems that can do and provide local services that meet our local needs. DMV Moves has much higher priorities to focus on, in my opinion. So I guess my question is kind of, do we really need to take time to show up and have this discussion? And I hope not, because as a DOSH stockholder and rider, I want to keep my DASH service.
Well, no, thank you for that question. So this was most certainly a topic of discussion at the last task force meeting. And so I want to highlight a few points that I hope will address the concerns that you've raised. And I suspect if they don't, you will enlighten me and clarify where maybe I've fallen short of some of the points you'd like to raise. Clark Mercer, the director of COG, noted at the task force that DMV Moves from the outset told the bus operators in the region that we were going to focus on coordination in ways in which the different agencies could work together to create a more seamless and integrated customer experience. That is our focus. And so, let me give you a few examples here. Like wayfinding, are there ways that we can reduce signage clutter that can be confusing for people who travel between jurisdictions, and you're looking at the bus stop and you see 5 different signs for 5 different providers, which if you're an everyday rider probably isn't confusing, but if you're someone who's now using the system outside of your jurisdiction, that can be overwhelming. Another example is at that stop where there's 3, say a different stop where there's 3 providers, if you need to call to get more information about what's going on, right now you call 3 different numbers. It seems like perhaps there's an opportunity to create one number you can call where the person who answers the phone can talk to you about all the bus service in the region, because we provide them with training and information on all of those services. There were several folks who raised the idea of the consolidation of the local bus operators in the region at the last task force. Mr. Mercer made his comments and said, if this is something that the task force wants to look at, we need to be very clear and give clear direction, to the advisory groups and to myself as the facilitator of both the task force and the advisory groups. And what I would say is there were many folks who, after that time, expressed that they did not think consolidation was the appropriate next step in terms of looking at bus operations in this region. And so at this time, we intend to continue focused on the improved coordination to create a more seamless and integrated customer experience, which is looking at how these operators work together to make the service work better for all in the region.
Appreciate that, Nick. Yeah, that sounds good.
And if I could just put a finer point on it, thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a lot of talk about purchasing, parts, training, safety, other things that would help coordinate the region. How many bus systems do we have regionally? Like 17 or something? 13. All 13 different purchasing programs, all this, that type of coordination, so there's better efficiency and, hopefully saves you all, but, we're trying to look at it in a more holistic way and, people have got to also come to the table in good faith and be open to opportunities like that as well, and not just be simple.
Well, and if I could add to what Chair Smedberg just noted, I do anticipate as we are at kind of the point in these work groups where we're talking about the coordination where a lot of the rubber is going to hit the road. And so I should be clear, as folks in the room, all of you have, or many of you have, some form of local bus service, it would not shock me if in the coming months you start to hear some concerns expressed by some of your operators. That is a healthy part of this process. We have to identify what the hurdles are. We have to work together collaboratively to try and find solutions. And some solutions are going to take some time to find and identify and to work through. And so, to give you an example, on bus procurement, some people like the customizations they have asked for in the buses they have bought for the last 10 years or 15 years. But that customization increases cost. But that's the thing. It also really drives you then need different training to work on. I'm going to be completely made up of bus system X versus bus system Y because of these customizations. And so if we all start to purchase more uniform types of fleet, we can also share fleet potentially. We can have mechanics that can work at any transit agency in this region, and there's just a lot of synergies beyond just kind of those initial cost savings that I think would be very beneficial for many of the providers in the region. That being said, for whoever has X customization, they're probably going to be upset as we have some of those discussions until we can work through what was the need for that and how can we solve it. But what I'm telling you is we're committed to having those discussions and working through those things to figure out how we can ensure these things that we all think make some sense can be implemented, but that is going to require, at times, giving a little to get something.
Okay, Sarah, yeah. Okay.
Just if I could respond quickly, especially to Mr. Smedberg's comments. I very publicly have brought this up before too, as a region, if we can try and purchase things together, because it does save money, not just individually, but collectively. I think one of the issues to the specifications that Mr. Donahue was bringing up, some localities are in a position or farther along with certain things. So Alexandria, for example, has the largest electric fleet in the state, in the Commonwealth. So we aren't necessarily going to wait for the other jurisdictions to be able to do that. Does that mean that we're behind buses and procuring without the rest of the group? Yeah, potentially. But hopefully at some point we are standardizing more of what we're doing, because I do believe in the regionalism that we're doing and trying to accomplish, not just at NVTC, but through the different groups that we're doing with COG and DMV moves. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that as well.
Yeah, Sarah?
I would second my colleague's comments. I think we recently got that presentation about on-route charging and sort of those opportunities. I think that's where the coordination opportunities really exist, is in facilities and maintenance and coordination. But sort of shifting a little bit, to ask a question about commuter rail, VRE specific. This often happens, I find. There's a lot of talk about WMATA, and then there's a lot of talk about local bus. And I just was wondering if you could speak to sort of, in a little more detail, where VRE's funding discussion fits in. Also, just given that VRE, as we're going to hear later more tonight, is doing sort of a big picture, long-term, transformational, change after the Long Bridge and headed towards 2050. Can you just speak to a little more detail about how the group is envisioning VRE funding?
And I do think, Mr. Donahue, are you able to hear Ms. Bagley?
I believe I heard the end of the question, and so I'll say out loud what I believe it was, and you all can help me fill in any gaps I may have missed.
Oh, am I too
think
far from the microphone?
the question was, we spent a lot of time talking about the elephant in the room, Amada. What do we expect out of kind of DMV moves in terms of VRE?
That's
Yes.
the long and short of it. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I heard the beginning, I lost you in the middle, and you came back at the end, and so I just wasn't sure if I missed something there. Yeah, so I think that is, it is fair to say that a lot of oxygen in the room has been spent on WMATA at this time. At the same time, the WMATA budget is larger than all the other budgets when you put together there, and they represent 85% of the ridership. At the same time, the other services are extremely important to the region and provide service that is simply we couldn't exist without. So on the VRE side, we did do a lot of work with VRE and Mark, and I want to talk about them kind of jointly because they're kind of two peas in the pod, if you will. For this discussion, we did identify some initial operating gaps to kind of continue FY25 service levels, as well as looking at some capital needs that they would have over time. That work, though, in my opinion, and I think we received kind of sign off from the task force at our last meeting on this, needs to be revisited in light of VPRA's kind of purchase of the Manassas line there. And so what I would say is give us a few months. We have to refine some of the work that we've done, particularly as you folks think about run-through service and the opportunities and potential there between Mark and Brewery. Just to be very candid, I think some of you know I was heavily involved in the Transforming Rail in Virginia transaction there. And the Manassas line purchase, along with that, does more for run-through service than I think we contemplated could have been possible when we started working on some of the commuter rail and VRE needs at that time. And so we really have to go and sit down with VRE and Mark and revisit the work we've done to date. But we are committed to doing that, and we will be doing that. We also know, I believe, the draft 2050 systems plan, I believe is you all are being briefed or you are taking some action on that this evening. So clearly that work product has been advanced significantly since DMV Moves was kicked off and since we did the survey work last summer. So we will be relying on that. And then similarly, Mark is, I believe, if I've understood my communications with kind of counterparts in Maryland correctly, is very close to putting forward a similar study for Mark. I forget the exact name. It's like growth and transformation system, but the net effect is it's something similar to the VRE 2050 systems plan. And so we will be working with both of those entities in light of those new planning documents and the purchase of the Manassas line to update commuter rail work. But you have our commitment that there will be information and stuff in the final DMV report about VRE as well as the local bus operators.
Okay. This is the Alexandria show, by the way. No, we'll have a couple other commissioners have things to comment as well. Matt Letourneau, Matt, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, maybe I'll offer a slightly different take. Probably not when it comes down to brass tacks, because at the end of the day, DMV Moves is going to make recommendations, and then it's up to the elected officials and elected bodies to decide what to do with them. So I'm going to offer you a little bit of the opposite and maybe lean harder into the disruptive part of this, because I don't think the model that we currently have is sustainable for a couple of reasons. Number one, we are not making efficient use of the total volume of transit money that's available to us as a region. We just aren't, because it's too split. And Metro obviously gets the bulk of that, and Metro by magnitude does the most maintenance and has all that kind of stuff. So the answer isn't necessarily perhaps one bus operator, but as we've been saying, it is to maybe look at one maintenance provider or one fleet type or something like that. And the other thing is, I just think we kind of have to have a realization about, it's one thing to look at the numbers on a chart and you see the fiscal cliff, but the reality is we're reaching the point where we're going to have to come up with that money. And we're doing it in an environment where the federal government may feel a little bit differently about funding transit as the previous administration did. So we have to drive value to the maximum extent possible of the total amount of transit money that's available. And that may mean doing things differently than what we've done, and it may mean some discomfort, but Metro really needs this capital money. I mean, we've seen the reason why we're able to give the ridership reports that we have and the system's functioning is because you see what happens when we invest in it. I mean, it's not complicated, but you know, you put that money in, you get results. You know, the system does not break down. We don't have fires all over the place. You know, all the things that were happening aren't happening anymore, and that's because the capital program, and it's not just money, it's also the way it's being managed and functioned. It's much better than it was, but you know, we can't go back to those days or else, you know, we know what happens. So, but going out to the public in this environment and asking them to give more money to transit, they're gonna want from us the maximization of that value. And for them, they don't distinguish as much between the operators and between a bus is a bus and a train is a train, and they want to get to where they're going. So I'm not saying, you know, jurisdictions should lose the ability to, you know, have operating authority or anything like that. But I do think, I hope the DMV Moves group is going to push the envelope on some of this disruption, because I think it's what we need at this point. And then if there's some of these recommendations get left on the shelf, that's part of the process.
Thanks, Matt. Matt DeFerretti.
Thank you very much for the facilitation. I'm just coming towards the mic so you can hear. This conversation sort of is an example of the great policy ongoing work that we have to do at DMV Moves. I couldn't help but thinking last week that also DC's fiscal situation as it relates to Congress is another component. So I just want to particularly thank you for continuing to move us along on the policy basis, while I feel that, at least for this moment, Virginia is in decent fiscal shape. And we are keenly aware that DC's fiscal situation has to be fixed for us to really reach the solutions that you've been leading us towards. So mostly it's a comment, but I also wanted to give you an opportunity if you had any thoughts along those lines.
In Maryland, Dick, you might want to mention that as well.
No, so thank you for those comments. So, you know, I think that what we've been focused on today is really making sure that we had dug through the numbers, had vetted the numbers, understood what that funding would deliver, and whether or not what it was delivering is what we thought was appropriate. As you heard in the task force last week, but that I've kind of glossed over today because it's now in the past from my perspective, is we had an entirely different proposal last fall. We spent several months digging through it, and we have dramatically changed kind of what that ask is, and I now think the task force feels more comfortable with where the numbers are and what the asks are in front of them and what that delivers. And it's something I think they think is worthwhile because it does ensure kind of that long-term state of repair, but also, I think as Mr. Letourneau was kind of noting there, leans in, particularly on some of these like cost efficiency measures where we can drive down the unit operating cost of providing service here. And so now in DMV Moves, we're going to start to pivot to kind of this other discussion that you just brought up, sort of about like, okay, now that we have a better sense of what this number is and what it will buy, how do people, what does that mean, one, for each jurisdiction? And, you know, clearly in Virginia that then, you know, goes out to, you know, it's not just Northern Virginia, then goes down to the jurisdictional level, whereas in Maryland, you know, the state typically pays the entire bill. But we're going to start talking about, okay, what does that mean for DC? What does that mean for Maryland? What does that mean for Virginia? And then start to have discussions about how potentially could that funding be addressed there. Now, clearly, I think as was noted earlier, DMV Moves is going to make recommendations, and those will then enter the political process in the fall, where, you know, many folks in this room and you know, the Richmond, Annapolis, and the DC Council will have a variety of discussions about how they want to react, you know, to those discussions. And I think importantly also in Virginia, you know, there's also the ongoing discussion, which I'm sure will be brought up in the SJ28 discussion, about what to do with kind of the ongoing operating rebaselining, which was paid for, you know, through 2 years, and kind of the operating, the budget, you know, which runs through the current fiscal year. But clearly, like, there's going to be a need there as well in Virginia to figure out how that portion kind of this funding puzzle is addressed as well. And so,
thanks.
You know, I think there's a lot of discussions that need to happen, and I think the good news is we are now in a place where we have the numbers, comfortable with what they are. They still will probably move some, as you saw, some of them are still being expressed as a range, but now we can start to have the discussion about how could it be funded and what is the appetite.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Walter Alcorn, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah. Yeah, just a couple of points. First of all, Nick, thank you for bringing up the re-benchmarking. And it's not just the state, but it's also local governments that are paying more after the re-benchmarking. And I think that gets back to an issue I know we're talking about on SJ 28. It's looking more deeply at how transit's being paid currently, how it's being financed currently. You know, who's paying for it, what are the mechanisms? And for local governments, it's a really heavy dependence on property taxes. And, you know, in the long run, does it make sense for transit to be competing with schools and fire and police and other local government services, or should we be thinking about that in a different way? So I appreciate you bringing up re-benchmarking, because it's something we need to really work through. The other point is the structure that we've set up for transit financing in Northern Virginia is effectively through NVTC. And the ability for us as local and state elected officials to basically coordinate, to have these conversations, sometimes to argue, but frankly to make sure that there's accountability of transit operators to taxpayers, in effect, is really important. So I would hope that we would, in whatever system or sources of revenue we come up with, that at least here in Northern Virginia, that we'll be able to keep this structure in place so that we can assure that some of the coordination that's so critical, you know, between, you know, Metro, we're just talking about bus service, you know, VRE, you know, we're getting into the BRT in a big way. These are many times overlapping systems, and if not managed carefully, then we really could lose accountability. So I think NVTC is going to be critical, and I hope we can keep that going.
Thanks, these are great comments. Nick, I don't know, any response?
I apologize, I caught the beginning of that and missed a little bit in the middle there. I'm sorry.
You can just say you agree. Sorry.
What I heard you say is that we need to ensure accountability, and that we need to look at different ways, revenue sources that can be used to look at transit funding in Northern Virginia. And so one, I just want to stress, I think accountability is extremely important as a part of this. Again, to me, it is very frustrating when you put 6 people in a room and talk about what the 2018 dedicated funding was supposed to achieve, and you get 7 opinions. And like, you may think that's like jest, that's not jest. Like, I've had hour-plus long conversations with people in a closed room, and everybody has a different recollection, interpretation, or opinion on what was supposed to have been achieved with 2018, and whether it was supposed to be sustainable forever, when it was supposed to run out. Was it 2032? Was it 2028? All sorts of things of that nature. Was it supposed to eliminate the SGR backlog? Like, I've heard so many things. So we've got to structure as much of this as we can to address accountability. On the revenue side, you know, I think from the DMV Moves Task Force, what we'll be doing is providing information to the task force about, you know, what the bill is for each jurisdiction, if they choose to go along with that level of funding, and then here are different ways it could be addressed. It is, you know, at this time, I think still up in the air as to whether or not the task force recommends a particular revenue source, but I do think we'll be providing a host of information that could be available, you know, to folks as they make some of those decisions. And I think you maybe also made some comments about how the money flows and whether it flows from the state to WMATA or flows through, you know, NVTC. And I'm certain some of your colleagues on the commission who serve in Richmond have heard those remarks. As a DMV Moves facilitator, it's probably not appropriate for me to make a comment one way or the other on the flow of those funds.
Thanks. Paul, additional comment?
Yeah, final comment, Mr. Chair. I just want to acknowledge the very thoughtful, strategic approach that Nick is taking to this, and all the work that he has done with regional partners and work groups, task force members, WMATA folks and others, you know, to get us to this point. I just want to acknowledge that. Nick, you've really done a great job. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Many of us have worked with Nick over many years, and we couldn't be happier. He may not be happy that he's in this position, but we're happy that he's in this position anyway. And just one comment from me. I would be interested in the potential effects of the tariffs that were announced yesterday, whether what we're doing is at all, what we're funding, what our plans are in the future, are they impacted? And with things moving very rapidly, I know it's hard to put a number, not asking for that, but I think it would be helpful to know to what extent can that impact our long-term plan, just as a matter of background information. So that's one for me. Any other questions or comments? Well, let me conclude with one more comment. As chair, let me just say that I agree with every comment that was made tonight. and every one of Nick's responses to it. So, but again, seriously, this is exactly what NVTC is all about. And it's really helpful. And Nick, thank you for your service for all of this. Anything else from anyone? Okay, I'll turn it back over to Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So while SJ 28 hasn't met yet this year, if Senator Evans will, we are looking to the crystal ball.
Yeah, we're gearing up to get some things done this year with SJ 28 Joint Subcommittee. Our next meeting is going to be at 2 p.m. on April 22nd at Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. We're kind of moving around a little bit. We're going to have one at the Metro headquarters in Alexandria as well before we come back and have another one here. But the meeting on April 22nd will be provide a refresher on existing transit funding operations or sources and how it works, and the funding challenges faced by our transit agencies, and we'll continue our discussion kind of at a high level on what a funding solution might look like in Virginia. And then looking ahead, we've got an additional 3 meetings in 2025 before we wrap up. In June, we're trying to discuss an updated series of revenue estimates from up to 15 potential sources. In September, we'll focus on a refined set of transit needs before we develop a recommendation at our final meeting, hopefully in November. And I want to thank Commissioner Alcorn and Director Mattice for being so active in the meeting. So thank you for your work and also for all the facilitation. We have a technical support group that has really great staff, not just of NVTC, but of different area agencies. So we're working to come up with the magic solution, or a solution.
Thanks, Senator Evan. Now, if Ms. Mattice is available to provide an update on TISDAC, the Transit Service Delivery and Advisory Committee, and any federal matters.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, so the Commonwealth Transportation Board's Transit Subcommittee just a couple weeks back introduced this. I've already, and I know I'm going to have Director Robinson mention this, but the DRPT has decided to do a re-examination this year of the formulas that are being used to do the allocation of capital and operating funding. This is actually required by code that every 3 years there's a re-examination. So this is something that is just kicking off right now. Just to give you a little sense of scope, this is just for our bus providers. So this is, VRE would not be affected by this, nor would WMATA. So this is the portion of the DRPT funding that is used via formula to allocate to our operators. And then also a program that funds capital. And so the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee, I sit on that on behalf actually of the Virginia Transit Association. So again, we just had that first meeting this week, but it's really, we're on a sort of a path of re-examination. Just to give a little bit of background, there was a major change in 2017, 2018. Honestly, it was tied to the development of CROC and WMATA pulling out. They did was a lot of work on what performance measures should be used. And so we're definitely going to be watchful of what DRPT wants to do with new or different that could affect the amount of funding that our local bus systems get. And this is, again, over the course of this year with a schedule of looking at having a new policy approved by the Commonwealth Transportation Board later in December. And I did give her a heads up, but Director Robinson, did you want to add anything more to the remarks that I just made about what we're doing?
Thank you, Kate. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. You pretty much covered it. I won't go into too much detail right now because DRPT staff is working with a consultant, Kimley Horn, on this effort. And we plan to bring back to the TISDAC in a couple months some recommendations that we'll then have another dialogue on. And as Kate mentioned, code requires this review of our merit operating formula. Merit stands for making, oh my goodness.
Then I can
Merit.
see
Kate, what's the E? Making
like I don't have that written down.
efficient and responsible investments in transit.
There you go.
Sorry, I had a little brain fog there. But that's exactly what we want to make sure we're doing. As years have passed since COVID, we see the formula playing out a little differently with providers. And so we're going to be going through a lot of scenarios and being very, making this a very collaborative effort with TISDAC members. As it was in the past, and potentially we will have some tweaks and improvements to recommend to the CTB, but we'll see where this plays out. And as we mentioned to the members earlier this week, no matter what policy gets approved by the CTB, we already have planned for a full year of kind of education and working with our partners before implementation. So we wouldn't want any partner to think that we were going to change any policy or formula and then make it effective immediately. We're going to give everybody lots of time to get familiar with and prepared for what comes next.
Thank you very much. So again, anything that's coming up, well, let me step back a second. So we're working very closely with all of the jurisdictional staff, moving through. We actually have sort of an ongoing working group when things up TISDAC start coming up. So we'll be engaging with the technical staff, but also bringing back to this body where it's important, times where NVTC needs to provide formal comment. There's actually a public comment at every one of the TISDAC meetings, and then also there'll be opportunities to testify to the CTB, in addition to me just being there at all the meetings and voicing some things. So, but this was something new, hadn't come up in a while, and so we just want to alert the commission and our local bus systems of things that may be coming up related to transit funding.
Great. Any questions? Thanks. Kate, do you want to move on to the federal update?
I do, and we do actually have write-ups in our meeting materials. Just a couple things I wanted to highlight. The continuing resolution that was passed, I know we had some conversation about the District of Columbia and those things. When it comes to public transit and the formula funding that's being put out, that actually is matching the authorized levels. There was no change or any significant change in the amount of funding that is being provided this year to WMATA, VRE, and PRTC. Also, there was fully funding of the PREA, which is the Dedicated Capital State of Good Repair funding for WMATA. That again went through the CR as fully funded. Obviously, we need to look in the future as to any changes in the way that money is allocated. The other thing is there's a President Trump's nominee to the Federal Transit Administration, Mark Molinaro. He'd actually just had his confirmation hearing before Senate Banking yesterday. My understanding it went fairly well. I think there's a number of folks that in the transit sphere who've had conversations with him. He actually is a transit advocate. He's from just outside of New York City and seems like a really, a pretty good person to lead that organization. Obviously, administration policies may change, but I think I don't anticipate there's a problem with his appointment going through. And then finally, I'm going to be heading this weekend to the American Public Transportation Association's conference, and I'm going to be participating in their reauthorization conversations. Again, this is reauthorization of the surface transportation, currently the IIJA bill. So I think I'll probably learn a lot about what's going on in that space, in addition to hearing some of the administration's priorities with that. So I will be reporting back to all of you following that meeting. And so that is my federal and TISDAC report, Mr. Chair.
Thanks a lot. Any questions for any of our presenters? Okay, not seeing any. Now a report from the chair of the Program Advisory Committee, and that will be Chair Polchek.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair Snyder. There is one action item and two updates from the Program Advisory Committee tonight. The Commission will be asked to authorize the Executive Director to execute the contract award for Division Route 7 BRT Phase 4.2 Mobility Analysis. Very exciting. Staff will then provide a Microtransit 101 presentation in response to requests from the Commission last month. And lastly, there's a brief update on the I-395-95 commuter choice program. With that, I'm very happy to turn it over to Vikram Sinha, who has good news about Envision Route 7.
Thank you, Commissioner, so much for that introduction. The big news is that our fiscal year 2023 community project grant, which was sponsored by Congressman Don Beyer and Jerry Connolly, was awarded last week by the Federal Transit Administration, which makes this action item all the more exciting for us. As a reminder, the Commission in December authorized the staff to issue an RFP, and after an evaluation process, staff have selected Kimley Horn. Tonight we are asking for the Commission action to award the contract. The primary area for the study for this next phase of work is in Fairfax County, between Seven Corners and the Mark Center area. The effort will collect traffic data and understand the operational impacts of bus rapid transit along the corridor. The study will also resolve the southern terminus of the bus rapid transit alignment in Alexandria and complete the analysis for Falls Church on how to optimize the use of limited right-of-way. The work will kick off later this year, and NVTC staff will keep commissioners appraised of study progress and outreach opportunities at commission meetings and provide more substantive updates at the June 18th Program Advisory Committee meeting. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. Any questions? Okay, not seeing any. So can I have a motion to authorize the executive director to execute the contract award for the Route 7 Phase 4.2 mobility analysis?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by wow, let me try again. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And I'll ask Tiffany if you could vote on this. Are you in favor of that?
Aye.
Aye, thanks very much. That item passes unanimously. Thanks very much for that. Back to Chair Polchak.
Thank you so much, Chair Snyder. At the last commission meeting, you asked for an overview of the type of public transit that is called microtransit. And we are very fortunate to have our senior program manager, Dr. Xavier Harmony, to provide an overview and give a 101 presentation on microtransit. We're covering what microtransit is, how it works, where it exists or is being considered in Northern Virginia, and some key policy considerations. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Harmony.
Thank you. Let's try going one slide. All right, cool. Got to click up because there's some animations built into this thing. So today we're going to be talking about microtransit. I'm going to be giving a bit of an overview. I recognize this is a new topic for not just this audience, but also probably for a lot of people who are working in jurisdictions. There's a lot of level setting of what it is to begin with, and the hardest question is really to start with what it is, because it really depends on who you ask. There's a lot of potential different attributes of microtransit. One of the most consistent ones is that it's on demand, which means you must make a request for the vehicle to come pick you up. But other things that can vary from system to system include things like whether you reserve with an app, the vehicle size, serving zones, grouping with other riders, etc. There's a lot of other attributes there. On the right of the screen, you can see here there's some examples of different types of vehicles that can and have been used for microtransit. The top photo is from our friends over in Prince William County on the ride. This is what they have, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but they have some active microtransit. And then that little picture at the top of the screen is actually from a DFET report about microtransit, kind of giving an overview of the process. But I'll talk about more of that in a moment. Okay, so the operations of microtransit are also very different, and I'm explaining this because when you hear someone talk about microtransit, you might think, oh, I've heard of that before, this is what it is, and you might be talking about an apple compared to an orange situation. So microtransit can have varying types of operations where you might have something that's a little more similar to like a bus system, where you might have virtual bus stops, which are bus stops that kind of be created to group riders together to get on a vehicle. Or you might have more direct door-to-door service like you have like a shared taxi. It can vary. So these graphics you can see on this slide indicate what it might be like. If the shared bus stop, virtual bus service, you would walk to a stop and be picked up, and those stops can change and vary depending on the algorithms behind it, but essentially it means that you're not necessarily being picked up directly at the location. And then the graphic on the right shows that it's more that you're being picked up directly where you want to be picked up and dropped off directly where you want to be dropped off. Now that's a lot of words to try to explain that. So I've got some animations that are going to demonstrate this. And we're going to directly compare traditional bus to microtransit to sort of show you how these things are different from each other. And this is the whole reason I got this clicker. So on the right of the screen, to level set, we've got the step-by-step instructions on how to catch a bus. Is this great for all audiences? You can take this home, show your kids, whatever. On the top left, you're going to see this little purple person with that star is, and this person is going to make a trip to the yellow star at the bottom right. So first, this is how you catch a bus. Walk to a stop. See the little person walk down there. You wait for your bus. And then you get on your bus and ride in the route, picking up other passengers on the way. Get to your stop. You get off and walk to your destination. That's how you catch a bus. Now we're going to compare this to microtransit. So same layout, same person on the top left, same journey down to the bottom right. But now instead of having that fixed route, which is now gone, you'll notice, we're going to catch microtransit. First thing you do is you press the pickup. So you open your app and reserve a vehicle or reserve a trip. This app, by the way, is the OmniRide app. I downloaded it myself and looked at it and selected a trip. So you can see this is what it looks like if you use it in this region. Then you wait for your vehicle. So we're going to have the vehicle pop up. And then you get in the vehicle and maybe pick up other passengers on the drive to your destination. And in this case, we're showing an example of the shared bus stop where you're going to get up here and just walk to your final destination. So that's how it looks a little bit different than catching a bus. You don't have a designated route. You have to schedule, order a trip to come pick you up. And you share a vehicle sometimes, but you're not going to have as many vehicles as a bus. So this is kind of how it works. The instructions are on the right screen for this one as well. But they're a little bit different in operations. Now, demand response is the broad umbrella for what microtransit is, and this is not a new concept or a new thing. Demand response has been around and used for half a century now. Most commonly, you're probably familiar with paratransit. That is the most common form of demand response we have in this region. A big difference between microtransit and paratransit is that paratransit has certain rules that restrict who can use it. It's intended for people with disabilities, whether it's a long-term thing or whether it's a short-term thing. It's still a requirement for being eligible for paratransit trips. Microtransit, on the other hand, is intended to be a public thing where anyone can use it. One of the main differences between microtransit as well is that when this newer form of demand response came along, it came along with a wave of new technology. So the algorithms that sort of figure out how to do trips and everything, the apps, that is kind of what brought along this new wave of demand response. The term microtransit itself only came around 2014. So while we're talking about this just over a decade later, the term is relatively new in the space, but the concept itself is much older. In Virginia specifically, there have been multiple pilots over the last 5 years or so. Much of the funding has come from DLPT, local and federal sources. DLPT also completed a study on rural microtransit, which was partly done in conjunction with two pilots, one with Bay Transit and one with Mountain Empire Older Citizens, Inc. So that's, I believe, Eastern Virginia and Southwest Virginia. Quite different sort of layouts and situations to here. But generally, the pilots in Virginia have three primary use cases for why they use microtransit or have tried microtransit. First is to replace services that are perhaps low in ridership, routes with very big headways, and something called deviated fixed route, which I won't go into too much here, but essentially it's not something that really exists in Northern Virginia as much, but is a way that you can ride paratransit with regular bus in some other parts of Virginia. The other way, the other reason you use microtransit pilots is to complement fixed route bus services. First mile, last mile is an example of that. And the final example is to provide more service coverage. If you don't feel like you have the funds to put out a full bus, traditional bus, you might try microtransit to expand coverage. But the main conclusion from all this is that because there are so many different use cases for these things, it's really difficult to compare pilots to each other. Why someone is piloting microtransit might be very different to someone else. So you can't really compare, again, apples to oranges. And there's a lot of variations and a lot of different goals that are trying to be achieved here. And that's something to keep in mind if you're thinking about this in your own jurisdiction as well. Okay. So when it comes to funding, this is primarily a reference slide, but a lot of the funding is heavily comes from Virginia, as mentioned before. There are 3 main grant programs that are used for this: technical assistance, demonstration project assistance, and the Transit Ridership Incentive Program, or TRIP. I won't go into this in too much detail. The summary of the table here explains what it can be used for, how many funds you can get from DFPT, and all these grant programs are being used by DFPT in different ways, or supported by DFPT in different ways to support microtransit programs in Virginia. But there are also local sources and federal sources being used. So where can we see this actually in Northern Virginia? There are various stages in Northern Virginia. The only place you're going to see it in action right now is in Prince William County. OmniRide started with Manassas Park. I believe it was, I got it back in the previous slide, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, 2022. But they have since expanded into the more of the Woodbridge kind of area, Quantico Dumfries Triangle area. But those are areas you can actually ride microtransit if you're so inclined to try it out. There are other parts of Northern Virginia, including in Loudoun and Arlington, where they are looking to actually implement pilots. And then Fairfax County has also included microtransit in their transit strategic plan, so very preliminary planning stage. So there's a variety of jurisdictions that are considering microtransit for different reasons, different purposes. Now I've talked a lot about what it is and where it is. I'm now going to highlight some really important considerations for considering microtransit. It's not all, bows and flowers and things. There are some things that you need to consider, and so bear with me because this part might look a little intense, but I'm going to walk you through it. That's my job here. All right, cost considerations. So you might think, okay, microtransit, I've heard that's a way to save money, and I'm here to say that the answer is not so simple as that. There are some opportunities that it could potentially save money compared to a traditional bus. There are some areas where it might not. I'm going to walk you a little bit through an example to help you understand this. First of all, the main cost in transit operations is the labor cost. And microtransit generally has a lower per vehicle labor cost to a bus because you don't need like a full CDL, for example, to drive a microtransit van. So this means per vehicle, it might start a little bit lower cost. But these vehicles also can't serve as many people. So using this example, these numbers are very demonstrative only. Don't try and hold anything against me here. These are made up. Just keep that in mind. Microtransit vehicle can hold 4 passengers per vehicle. So here you have 4 people, and this is where you are on the cost. This is going to be a graph, trust me. If you add 1 more person, what happens to the cost? It's going to go up because you need a whole other vehicle out there for the microtransit. The bus cost doesn't change, it stays the same. Then if you add up to 8 people, you can see that cost continues. And as you add more people, you see you get to a point where the cost of the microtransit service exceeds the cost of the bus. The bus cost doesn't change because as you add more people, they can get on that one vehicle. But as you add more people in microtransit, you need more and more vehicles out there to serve that same number of people. This is an important concept because it doesn't mean that microtransit isn't right or that it's wrong for your jurisdiction. It just means that you need to reevaluate what you're trying to measure and what your actual program goals are. The more successful a microtransit is from a ridership perspective, the more financially unviable it is. So you really need to reconsider what your measures of success are. For example, using ridership as an evaluation metric can be misleading, as this is kind of suggesting here. Instead, metrics that capture the accessibility, safety, customer satisfaction impacts may be more appropriate. And so these, again, think about why you're doing this, what are your goals. Microtransit really primarily works if you have a really low density area that you're serving and that you don't expect any ridership demand or increase in demand over time. It's primarily to serve coverage goals instead of ridership goals. Really rethinking why you're doing this. This doesn't mean that microtransit isn't suitable anywhere. There are advantages and disadvantages to microtransit just like every other mode of transportation. So the next slide kind of summarizes that. So this is a lot of words. This is primarily a reference slide. So if you're thinking about this, taking this back to your jurisdiction, like, should we be doing this? Here's an example of things to be considering from the advantages side and the disadvantages side. Some of the advantages include, for example, it can replace underperforming transit routes. And we've seen that in Virginia, where people have used, or jurisdictions have used microtransit to replace underperforming routes. They can also better serve low-density areas better than traditional transit, for example. But on the disadvantages side, they have a high failure rate. The programs can have a higher failure rate. So for example, 25% fail within 2 years, 40% fail in less than 3 years. This is what the industry stats have told us. And they often have higher costs, as I demonstrated as well. So as I've been emphasizing a lot through this, and I'm going to keep emphasizing that you really need to think about what your program goals are, what you're trying to achieve with this service. And then that brings me to my last slide, policy considerations. My number one policy consideration is you need to identify your bigger picture mobility program goals to understand why microtransit might be more suitable than other transportation alternatives, and really think about what purpose you're trying to achieve here. So the other policy considerations are evaluating how microtransit fares integrate into larger fare systems. A lot of the examples we've seen in Virginia have been in fare-free systems, which has been enabled seamless integration because you don't have to worry about fares. But we already have a pretty established fare system in Northern Virginia. It's a little more complex. Our friends over in Montgomery County have stepped into these waters a little bit more because they're dealing with this fare system as they're bringing in a microtransit pilot themselves, or a microtransit service, I should say. But it's something to think about in jurisdictions in Northern Virginia as well. We also need to consider how to manage microtransit costs. One of the things that some of the previous parts have found is that people like the services, and so ridership increase. And again, as that ridership increases, it creates financial unviability potentially. So you need to really consider how to manage those costs, how to explore those balances supply and demand, and people want to use the service against how many vehicles you have to provide that service, or how many operators. And then finally, consider how to mitigate potential equity concerns. So there might be technology gaps. You know, not everyone is able to use adapt to a new app in the same way, or understand how you find a virtual bus stop. It can be complex for some populations and some people, and that's totally normal, and it's something that you have to deal with and overcome. Different transit agencies have dealt with it different ways, but it's something you need to actually confront. And then finally, ADA, American Disabilities Act, accessible vehicles need to be enforced. Again, if you want this to be a public service, it needs to serve all the public. So that's it. That's everything as the Microtransit 101. So I hope you felt like you learned something, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks a lot, Xavier. I know one of the functions of NVTC is to do some research on emerging issues and emerging opportunities. Yes, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So we did approve the microtransit in Leesburg, but I'm still a little bit nervous about it. It sounds to me like from what you were saying, you said that you should look at coverage goals, which to me says you shouldn't look at replacing an existing bus system with it, which is what we're doing in Leesburg, which makes me a little bit nervous because people are, you know, they're used to riding that bus, and I feel like it's a fairly well-used system. So is that your advice, that you wouldn't replace an existing system? Secondly, our staff said that it's basically going from the buses that are, the small buses like in your picture that already are in Leesburg, and they're going to minivans. And has there been any kind of user feedback about going to a bus that looks like a bus and then going to a minivan, which I see that they're branded and all of that, but in my mind, I might feel less secure about getting into a minivan than actually getting onto like an official bus with the big windows and all of that. So that's my first question.
So to answer the first part of your first question, I'm going to make it very clear. I'm definitely not telling anybody exactly what to do with their services. That is not my role here. But I will say others have used microtransit in the past to replace low-performing services.
Okay.
So that has been done before. Sometimes a very low-performing service could be indicating that there's just not enough demand to have a traditional bus out there, and a coverage, something that can provide just basic mobility coverage is what's warranted. It's a situation by situation, and I know the folks at Loudoun County, and I'm sure they did their homework, and part of doing a pilot is also to establish, is it the right fit? Is this the right way to go? Or is it something that we need to perhaps put back on the shelf and think about? A pilot can help you figure out those things and find out, is it right for Loudoun County, for example?
Okay.
So I think that is like, it's totally, it's definitely done to replace full-point bus services. But a pilot can help you figure out, is that the right kind of mobility option?
Yeah.
As your second question, I haven't actually, I've seen a lot of some of the findings of like experiences and things. I haven't seen anyone cite the difference between like a van and a larger traditional bus. I think I could see arguments either way. For me, most of the user experience stuff I see in the research is mostly around technology. Like trying to figure out how to use the app to schedule a trip, how to find where the vehicle's going to stop to pick you up, trying to understand where you're on the trip.
Ridership is going up. Ridership is going up generally in these pilot programs.
Some yes, some others
Well, you did,
not so much. It really depends on like how you design the program and what your goals are. Some people try and do these things in the hope it increases ridership, and then you got to try and figure out, are we going to keep with this and scale up the microtransit and eat those costs a little bit, or are we going to use this to help generate the demand, perhaps to bring out a better designed bus service? So it really depends what goals you're trying to achieve there.
Chair, may I ask my second question?
Just keep going on.
So I get, my other question is the drivers, I suppose they would need to be trained differently, or maybe are not the same that trained as the people that already are working in our system. We're under a contract. There could be union issues. Like, how is that worked out?
So that is a valid point. I will say your friends over in Prince William County on the ride, they also use a union. They also have introduced microtransit. So my advice would be to go talk to them, because they have walked through these issues. I haven't done that personally. So I think that's one of the great things about the regional nature of our work, is that we can learn from our neighbors, and I think they'd be a great example to learn from. But that is definitely something that's brought up. I will say the one difference is that you don't need to be as qualified necessarily to be a microtransit operator, but you already need a CDL operator.
But then the pay might be less. So
It's
then
potentially a factor.
Yeah.
Interesting questions. Yeah, Jim.
You mentioned the ride-hailing services, and it does seem to me that that's a distinction here between bus and rail transit, right? There isn't a private sector option for the most part for those services, but here there is, right? I could get a Uber van on my phone, and if I wanted to pay a little bit less, we could pick up other passengers on the way. Obviously, it would be more expensive, I suspect, than a paratransit service, but only because that paratransit service presumably is subsidized by government. So I guess the question would be, at what point does it make more sense for the local government, rather than standing up a new service, to provide a voucher for community members who need it and they can use it? We have a similar taxi cab program in the county, right? So why would you stand up your own service, buy the vans, hire the drivers, when arguably, perhaps, maybe, at a lower cost, you could provide members of your community with access to that service just with a voucher?
Yeah, I'll start by saying, it's a really good question. I'll start by saying one of the characteristics that I sort of skipped over a little bit is that there's a whole variety of ranges in partnerships between the private and the public when it comes to microtransit. They are very generally public-private partnerships, but you can go from a situation where you buy the vans and everything and do a lot of stuff yourself and mostly use the private side for their algorithms, or you could go what's called full turnkey operations, where everything's outsourced and contracted. So that includes like then bringing in the operators and everything themselves, and it's really fast implementation, but you don't have as much fitting to your own existing quality and stuff. So there's a huge variety of ranges of operations where you can fit out, and we see these ranges in Virginia as well. That question about whether to actually go microtransit versus vouchers is very much a decision the jurisdiction should make themselves based on what they feel best serves the needs they're trying to meet. Like I said throughout this presentation, you doing this would meet a certain goal. You need to figure out what that goal is, and microtransit might meet that goal, it might not. And so a pilot is one way to help figure it out, but a voucher could also work. And so ultimately, it's really just coming down to what you think might be the best policy decision. You might want to try one or the other, and just kind of see how it works. There's no universal right answer, which is the hard part of a lot of this stuff, but it's also one of the unique opportunities of you all being here to lead your communities.
Another tool in our toolbox.
Right.
Yes, Walter.
Very quickly. So, yeah, just one example I learned of in 2019, Arlington, Texas. They had one bus route that had like 1 or 2 riders at a time. They switched to this type of a system, and it's still going apparently, and they cap fees anywhere from Arlington, Texas to anywhere else, no more than $5 a trip, so that gives you a sense. And they were saying it actually is cheaper than running the one bus. So I think it really varies. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent discussion, and thanks for the work. Any other questions or comments on this one? Yeah, maybe for the future, if there are new pilot projects or there's new research out there, maybe revisit this, because I do think this is a relatively unexplored area around here. And there may be some great cost savings and service improvements that are possible. So, any other questions? Okay, thanks a lot. I'll turn it back to Chair Polchak.
Thank you very much, Chair Snyder. Next is I-395-95 commuter choice update. Happy to share that NVTC staff have prepared a staff report with an update on the FY26 and 27. Wow. I-395-95 commuter choice call for project. The staff report contains a list of technical evaluation scores for eligible projects that have applied. The public comment period for the call for project is open through April 11th, and all comments received will be shared with members of the Joint Commission Working Group at the all-virtual meeting scheduled for April 24th. In addition to the public comment period, a virtual public hearing will be held immediately prior to the Joint PAC JCWG April 24th meeting to provide members of the public with an opportunity to provide feedback on the draft program of projects under consideration for funding. The virtual public hearing will start at 4 p.m. and the public will be able to register ahead of time. The Joint Commission Working Group will be asked to review a draft program of projects that will be presented to both commissions at their May meetings. NVTC staff are available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Chair Polchak? Okay, not seeing any. Moving right along. Agenda item number 6, VRE expression. We welcome VRE. We welcome CEO Rich Dalton to give us his CEO report and to do the annual VRE Commission organization, which includes an update on the system plan. So you have a tough act to follow. Do you have any animation that's part of it?
Yes. No, sir. Exactly. But we will give you a micro version of our system plan, a micro version of the orientation.
I like where you're going. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Commissioner members. First of all, just give you my report. You do have the CEO report in your package. Just want to talk about ridership for a second. I'll just do a quick comparison. I did allude last month to the first part of February being a little bit soft, but really ridership started to pick up for us in February. But I'll just give you a quick comparison though from the month of March to the month of January, simply because it's similar service days. It's a 21-day month. So for the month of March, our ridership had increased over 105%. So looked slightly doubled in terms of total ridership. We ended up about, for the calendar year quarter, our total rider, about half of our ridership came from the month of March. I'll just give it to you that way. So the first couple of days of April, still showing signs of increases there. From a reliability standpoint, still hovering in that 85%, still seeing some congestion issues out there. Of course, we weren't seeing the same winter-related or, winter weather-related congestion that we saw back in January and February. So just wanted to give you those couple of highlights as from the report standpoint. Glad to take any questions there before we move into the next segment.
Any questions for Rich?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, but return to work, is that what's happening?
Return to office, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And is it, anecdotally, do you feel like it's starting, halfway, done?
So we tracked the return to office back in third week of February or whatever. A lot of the agencies were required to submit return to office plans. We tracked some of those. Those would suggest that we should still start seeing or continue to see some bumps, increases over the next couple of months. Of course, that's countered a little bit right now with us because we get highly impacted this time of year with spring break.
Yeah.
So 30% of our riders come from, the Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg, Stafford County area, and all those schools were on spring break last week, right? So we're seeing an uptick this week as well. So just a little bit of.
Thank you.
Ask me again in June. How's that? We'll see where we can.
I'll micro ask you and be ready for a micro.
Micro answer.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry I got this started. Thanks a lot, Rich. We really appreciate it. That's good news about the ridership increases. So maybe I'll turn to you for the briefing orientation for the commission, if you might.
Absolutely. We'll take. Let me set this up while we're bringing up the slides. What I want to do here is I'll give you an orientation as I've done in the last couple of years. You do have we did give you a primer in your packet that you can look at. I'm going to give a plug at the beginning and at the end. For those that have not had the opportunity to participate in a system tour with VRE, please see me. Would love to have you out there. We can customize the tour for you depending on your availability, your accommodate your busy schedules, but really seeing a lot of what I'm going to talk about a little bit, but really getting out there and seeing. I think some of you around the table here can attest to the value of that tour. So with that, let's go to the next slide. Next slide, just you can find this on our website. This is our mission statement, and actually is for the most part applicable now. I'll just make the point that this is something we're likely to. We've come back and periodically check this. We're likely to update that in the near future, which of course this commission would be involved in how that updates or how that update would go. Next slide, please. Do want to talk, and again, this slide here puts a bunch of bullets up there. We will get through those. I'm going to just on the next few slides, I'm going to talk about just some highlighted areas that I think would be of interest for you. But again, there's some material that you can read. Come out and we'll talk about some of these things in more detail. Next slide, please. So from just as a reminder, VRE's parent commissions consist of both NVTC and PRTC. The commissions, of course, that own VRE, but delegate many actions to the operations board. The operations board is essentially a committee of both commissions, and this is all done through a plan of delegation. Next slide. We do have two major governing documents: master agreement. That's basically an agreement signed by all the jurisdictions that VRE operates through. The bylaws are a subset of that, and actually outlines stipulates, as stated up here, the operations board, their different powers, officers and duties, etc. So those are our two major documents. Just a note that if we were to amend the master agreement, of course, we open that up. All the current jurisdictions would have to agree to any changes there. Doesn't happen often. I'm not suggesting that that would happen anytime soon, but when it does, it's a pretty heavy lift for us. Next slide, please. We'll speak real quick to the plan of delegation. The commissions have delegated to the operations board for example. So we'll bring a budget as recommended by the operations board to both parent commissions for approval. So subsequent to that, as long as, like say, there's contracts or there's expenses within that budget that's already been approved by the commissions, generally speaking, the operations board handles the subsequent approvals for that. There are some exceptions, and the major exceptions are operating agreements with CSX, NS, now the Virginia Passenger Rail Association, and Passenger Rail Authority, and Amtrak. So there are still several things that still come to the commissions. Next slide, please. And then from that, the operations board has delegated a couple of very specific things to me. One being a dollar limit to procurement authorizations and procurement solicitations. Next slide, please. The plan of delegation, again, I'm not going to go through every one of these bullets, but I will say they're on 2 slides here. One of the things in this, I want to preempt something here for you, because we're currently updating the plan of delegation. It'll be an item that we'll take to the operations board to recommend to the commissions. It's not going to expand any authority. It's really just to clarify some things. There's things that come up to us, and it's somewhat like, well, does the commissions need to see this, or does the operations board need to see this? So we want to just clarify some things within that current plan of delegation. You'll probably see that in a couple of months or in the summertime. Next slide, please. Just another been on the previous slide, but just another piece here too is we do have, when we acquire real property, again, recommendations from the operations board, it does come to the commissions. We will, one area and more so in current time we come across is really in the event that we need to give somebody a temporary easement or actually get a temporary easement across commission's own property. Sometimes it comes about such that it needs to happen fairly quickly, so we want to clarify that in the updated plan of delegation as well. Next slide, please. And this just highlights again operations board representation. There's 6 jurisdictions in the PRTC, there's 6 jurisdictions in PRTC, 3 in NVTC, and then the Commonwealth Transportation Board chair designee. And right now that's Tiffany Robinson that's on the operations board. Next slide, please. And whether you knew it or not, you own rolling stock. And so all the rolling stock, both the existing 100 rail cars, you have 21 new rail cars coming in a couple of years, and 20 locomotives. Now, it's not like I can produce a title that has your name on it or anything like that. That doesn't work in the rolling stock business. But I just want to let you know that you do own rolling stock. And then finally on, I believe this is the last on this section, next slide. Just want to give you some perspective a little bit. There's about 65 people on the VRE staff, but it takes about 240 people on a daily basis to operate VRE. And so just want to point out some of our major contracted service providers, in addition to in the bottom left our host railroads there, operating host railroads, who also provide to us through contract dedicated personnel. bring your attention to the top right though. The Keolis Rail Services Virginia currently provides our certified engineers, certified conductors, supervision management, and through another contract, the mechanical support. We have began a resolicitation on this contract. This contract was originally a base 5 years with 2 5-year options. That is set to expire a year from June. And so we've started that solicitation process. So again, that's something that we will bring back to the commissions likely later in the fall. But we're doing that work right now. So next slide, please. Okay, so to combine a couple of things here with this orientation, what I wanted to talk about is sort of leading into our system plan update, which once again, this won't be the last time you'll see this, but this is meant to be a very concise briefing here. But wanted to combine two components here. We've got Transforming Rail in Virginia, which is actually, I'll just say, definitely inspired our updated plan here, and then the next couple of slides. But I do want to bring up a couple of our staff members. First, Dallas Richards, our chief engineer. He's going to tell you sort of why Transforming Rail in Virginia and how that impacts us. And then Nick Ruiz, who's been in front of you before. It's been a little while to talk about the system plan. So they too will. They have a concise set of slides here, and we'll get through that, and then of course take questions at the end. So with that, Dallas.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, thank you for your time this evening. It's difficult to get engineers excited about much of anything, but this is the most exciting macro program I think I've ever worked on in my career. So, Transforming Rail in Virginia. Next slide, please. TRV, as we call it, is a $4 billion plus program, a major investment in the state of Virginia and in the rail infrastructure and others. The program created what we know as VPRA in 2020. Mr. Donahue, who was earlier here, was a part of that. I'm not here to represent VPRA but to represent the program of projects that is TRV and how we are included in that, how VRE is included in that. It's the purchase of the right-of-way was one of the biggest and the first elements of the program, and unique in very many ways. I'll offer that they purchased half of the CSX right-of-way on the eastern half, Lorden South, and the west half of the right-of-way from Lorden North. Coincidentally, primarily our stations are on the east side to the south, and on the west side to the north. You can see how it mates nicely with our service in that purchase. There are multiple stakeholders. I won't even try to name them all here. You saw many that Rich just named, the host railroads, VPRA, all of these organizations that are part of this program and delivering it successfully. There are the crown jewel of the program, if you will, is another crossing of the Potomac River, the new Long Bridge. The state is working very aggressively on that right now with the goal of delivering in the next 5 years in that bridge program. 2 major solicitations that are working today. So that is the main brunt of it, which is currently the bottleneck of our service, crossing the Potomac River where it goes down to 2 tracks. Next slide, please. The stated goals of the program are really the capacity, quality, and choice. This is how it's stated even on the website. It's infrastructure and right-of-way that create additional capacity and fluidity. It's really about that fluidity between the 2 services, and I want to make a point that it's freight and passenger. That there is a segregation, if you will, in the sense of predominantly freight and predominantly, but not exclusive. They have to be interoperable. It's the only thing that creates and maintains the fluidity that is part of the program. Quality, it expands high quality, modern service throughout for more frequent and more reliable service on our network. Choice, more choices for moving people and goods efficiently in the state, right, all over the state. I will say it is a statewide program. I'm focusing here today on the Northern Virginia parts of the program as it's most important to us here. But it is statewide. Next slide, please. I wouldn't expect you to see all these, the bullets here, but it's really, the number of them is meant to sort of drive the point home of how many projects this really includes. There are literally dozens of projects between Richmond and DC. There's more than a dozen just in our service area alone, major projects. It's corridor, so part of it also was the Manassas. We've mentioned it a couple times tonight already. The Manassas line purchase and the Frederick line purchase both are part of the program. Key projects to us locally, obviously, I'll work our way south from LaFont Station, where we're going to be doing adding new station, 4th track on that side of the river. Crystal City, basically moving our station 300 yards to the south, if you will, along the corridor. Alexandria Station, including King Street and Commonwealth Bridges, some of you are familiar with. And Seminary Yard, which is game-changing, if you will, for VRE, and being able to changing our midday storage operations and our function differently. And then finally, Franconia Springfield Station in Fairfax County. All just 5 or 6 projects within the major program and what it does for us. With that, just the last slide for me. Not that you expect to see much of just sort of the genesis of this is all these schedules, right? These are not geographic, these are arranged differently, these are arranged on time, and how these sequence out throughout our program over the next 5 years. These are all construction projects that will have to be delivered in the next 5 years in the system to really meet the goals of the program. With that, I'll turn it over to Nick.
Thank you, Dallas. So while Dallas talked about the what, I'm here to talk to you about the why. I think it goes without saying that an expansion of rail service to all of our 9 jurisdictions served is going to accrue some pretty significant benefits, not just in 2050, but even before that in 2030. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just underscore that the system plan that is forthcoming to the Operations Board and later to the Commission, you all are not going to have to wait until 2050 to see some of these benefits. After the completion of the Long Bridge, we'll be able to run up to 63% more daily round trips on the weekday and run a full weekend service on both Saturdays and Sundays. I mean, I think that's a huge transformational element that should not be understated. In addition to the service aspect, we're also going to be continuing a capital program through both TRV and post-TRV additional system plan capital programs to expand platforms, to add additional track capacity, crossovers, to permit a higher fluidity service on the rail corridor. We'll be adding stations, we'll be expanding yards, including the new midday storage facility at Seminary, as Dallas mentioned. If you go on to the next slide, just taking a look at some of the benefits, I had to think back. It was exactly a year ago this month, last year, that I was here and presenting on the benefits of the system plan in 2050. And I just want to focus your attention in the farthest right column here, because that really is the enumeration of the expected benefits, annual benefits to the region by providing this higher intensity of commuter rail service. Underscoring that we could have over $16 million in annual vehicle operating cost savings. That's operating cost savings to you and I and to the citizens of Northern Virginia and the region that aren't putting additional dollars, gas, maintenance into their vehicles. Also, a tremendous amount of vehicle miles traveled reduction, over 50 million miles of travel avoided on the highways. And you all don't need me to draw the conclusion that a mile saved on the highway is $1 saved, not literally, but many dollars saved in terms of avoided maintenance on the region's highways. And then also just to underscore that this is a multimodal program. We are also providing additional capacity and fluidity for freight service indirectly. And our friends at DRPT last year provided us with a really awesome statistic that the annual freight benefit of the RF&P corridor in 2030 is over $157 million to the continent. So basically avoids over 4,000 daily truck trips from traveling up and down 95 and 395. And just to give you a sense of scale, if you put 4,180 trucks together end to end, it'd be a line of trucks 57 miles long. So that's from the Pentagon all the way down to Spotsylvania. So that is a huge quantifiable benefit that accrues to the region. If you move on to the next slide here, just a summary, and I'll come to the operations board and the commissions with a more detailed version of this in the coming months, but just showing the progression or the intended progression of additional service in 2030 and 2050. Moving on to the final slide here, like I said, this is an abridged presentation of a much longer presentation. Hopefully I'll give later in the year. Really, we see in the future VRE as a region's transportation spine. And I want you to think about all the multitude of transit trips that just are not possible today. Somebody who lives in exurban Spotsylvania who wants to commute to a job in Courthouse here, that's a really arduous trip to take today if you're trying to make it by transit. But in the future, that'll be a breeze when you've got trains running every 20 minutes, half hour in the peak period, peak direction. So just want to underscore that there's a lot of connections that we already do serve. There'll be a multitude more connections that we'll be able to serve with the expansion of this service. So that is the entirety of my presentation. I'm happy to turn it back to Rich or others for questions. I'm not sure if you can do that.
Turn it back over to the chair.
Absolutely, thanks. Those are really great presentations, and the possibilities for incredible rail service in the future are really exciting. So thanks so much for that. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I'd like to recognize our very own Sarah Bagley, who is chair of the operations board.
That's quite the introduction, man. Okay, so I just wanted to, it's interesting, I've seen this presentation before, and I appreciate you guys boiling down a very in-depth, plan into really 4 or 5 slides, and I've used that analogy myself already in Alexandria. One thing that did jump out at me watching it this time is the mission statement is actually going to be ready for an update because of its focus on commuter rail. I mean, when we execute this vision, it's not exclusively sort of a commuter rail, it's a passenger rail, it's a, so I was sort of struck by that this time, when you went through, Rich, the orientation, and just wanted to highlight that what this vision is gets away from sort of one direction and becomes bi-directional. The other thing I just wanted to highlight is that last slide, for me, comes full circle back to the DMV moves SJ28 conversation. Like, VRE is the connection into the transit system. It's people's way in to that larger transit conversation, and I love that spine image. And I would just invite everybody, when you have a chance to really look at it, because that's the holding hands sort of these systems that are all under evaluation. And so I just think VRE has a vital role to play in the larger transit conversation and connecting people to it. And so I think it's a great slide and an exciting vision.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. This is very exciting. You guys are doing a great job. And the fact that you'll be able to go from Culpeper to Spotsylvania by train is pretty cool. Right now, if you did it, you have to wait in DC till the end of the day and then come back out, right? But is this kind of predicated on any kind of population growth? I mean, do we have to hit some kind of metric there?
Yeah, so the system plan really took a deep dive into the expected population growth in our different service regions. And one of the things we found was that the exurban part of the Fredericksburg area, Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg and Stafford especially, and then parts of Western Prince William, were really set to grow significantly more than Arlington, Alexandria, and Fredericksburg. Fairfax. So there was an imperative to increase the service. It's an area of the region that really doesn't have the level of transit service that it's going to need to avoid that kind of congestion that the region up here has largely solved or mitigated for in terms of avoided additional lane miles. So yeah, very much so we consider the expected growth in population in those outer regions.
Thank you, Walter.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound negative, but I need a lot more data. I need a lot more information on this before supporting it. I was very, very involved in developing the Silver Line, both looking at the ridership assumptions, looking at the land use around the stations. All those play into whether or not this makes sense financially. We're also going to need to look at capital costs. We're going to need to look at operating costs. Just because you have a jurisdiction that's growing incredibly, I'm sorry, but if you have 1 or 2 commuter rail stations, that doesn't mean people are going to ride the trains. It just doesn't guarantee that. So we have to look more deeply before we jump headlong into this as a commission to make sure that it makes sense. We need to peel back those assumptions and make sure that people are actually going to ride it, and frankly, that it's worth it. That the investment that's going to be required on the capital side and on the operating side. So it can be done, I'm sure, and I love the vision, but let's just make sure we've actually taken that deep dive and are realistic about it. So, thank you.
I'm sure that will be very much in the thinking of VRE. I'm also, there's an element here about connecting parts of the Commonwealth that aren't connected now. That the only option is by car, up 81 or up 95. There's an element there. It's not only the micro issues you're talking about, Walter, but this is part now of a comprehensive rail system to serve the entire Commonwealth, and not only that, to serve the East Coast of the United States. So it seems to me that one of the most attractive things I've seen about this is the role that it plays in terms of the much larger system to both serve the Commonwealth and provide really meaningful options to use of car in corridors like 81 and 95 up and down the East Coast.
Mr. Chairman, I absolutely agree. But we need to look at what are the assumptions about any transfers that are assumed. What are the assumptions about the reverse rides? How many passengers are we really thinking are going to use the system? What's the overall fare structure? And frankly, we need to look at we have a little bit of a fiscal cliff coming in terms of our subsidies that we're going to be paying because the federal money is going to run out soon. So how does it fit in with that as well?
Mr. Chairman, just one thing, you mentioned commuter. I think what they're talking about is post-commuter. That's something that we should think about as well. But I wanted to ask, how does this compare to our neighboring states like Maryland, North Carolina, what are they doing?
I can't speak specifically, to what any one other transit agency or state's doing, but I do know that at the national level, the commuter rail industry is looking at ways to reinvent itself, kind of as you alluded to, in the post, kind of traditional 9-to-5 consumer space. And I think in some areas, there's been some successes. In other areas, I think they're still kind of in the discussions that we're in right now. Well, that would be great to do, but how are you going to pay for it? So I think it's kind of premature to make those kinds of comparisons right now, because everyone's just now starting to think about how they can,
Let me add that Mark Trains is doing something similar to what we're doing right now, right? So in fact, we are at some level collaborating, sharing, particularly when it comes to you'll hear the term run-through service between Virginia and Maryland and vice versa. So we're collaborating on that. And then there's I just want to, getting back to a couple other points here, there's also a larger picture that from a statewide planning perspective, of course, DRPT plays the lead role from a statewide rail planning perspective, and to some degree VPRA as well. So we're connected with that as well, just trying to stay abreast of the statewide vision as well. So.
Great. Any other comments or anything?
Just to address Supervisor Alcorn's request for data, I promise you the slides at the Oxford level are 5 and 10-fold more detailed, and we had conversations about sort of how closely are you working with COG models, how closely are you working with jurisdictional expectation, on growth, on budget. And so I just want to assure this body as well, before it comes back to this body, it's going to have a more thorough vetting at the Oxford level, and I appreciate that feedback. The other data point for me is that I think the era of the $30,000 car is sort of ending. Cars $30,000 and under, and so the future consumer who right now might drive, is thinking about the wear and tear in their car and what the next car is going to cost. And so I take seriously all your points about data and how many users, but I'd like to think, the future user is someone who's going to be making different calculations about cost and about climate impacts and that sort of thing.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Great, thanks a lot, great discussion, thank you. Next item, Department of Rail and Public Transportation, DOT. I'm so glad that Director Tiffany Robinson is here, and please give your report, and thanks again for all that you're doing in that area.
Not sure she's hearing your audio, just because it's a little bit quieter. Ms. Robinson, are you able to give your report?
Director Robinson, are you able to hear us?
That's okay.
She usually gives short reports,
Yeah.
and I'm like,
Director Robinson, can you hear us?
I'm sorry, I'm having a really hard time hearing audio.
Great, well, it's your turn, so we look forward to your report. You bet.
Okay. I'll be, in the interest of time, I'll be really quick. Everyone has my director's report in your packet, and I linked to DJ Stadler's BPRA Executive Director's report as well. So all I wanted to highlight really is that we'll be bringing all of our proposed projects from our funding round to the April 15th Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting. And then of course we'll be having public hearings all across the Commonwealth, and there's one on May 8th scheduled at the VDOT Northern Virginia District office in Fairfax for anyone who's interested. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the DRPT Director? Not seeing any. Once again, thank you very much for what you're doing for the region. Much appreciated. Okay, Kate, it's your turn.
Hey, thank you. And again, we are going to be working in troubleshooting the audio. We're not exactly sure what's going on in the building or room right now, but that's something that we're all going to be on top of. We do have your monthly newsletter highlights in here for folks to take a look at. I actually really have the pleasure this evening of introducing 3 new staff to NVTC who have slogged through, some on their first week. We do have with us Shannon Bacon and Jason Adel, who I think are 3 or 4 weeks in. If you guys want to stand up and just give a wave. They've just joined us as program analysts. And Meg Johnston, who's in day 4, has joined us as our new grants and procurement manager. So we're really excited to have them on board. We've been able to, it is a very nice time to be hiring some amazingly talented people, so we're having to join our staff here. Just a reminder that we do have that Joint Commission Working Group and Program Advisory Committee meeting coming up on April 24th at 4:30 p.m. and it's a virtual meeting. That's where we're going to be bringing up commuter choice, including having a public hearing to start off. Our next commission meeting here is on May 1st. Just upstairs at 6 for executive committee and then down here. And then our joint WMATA committee and legislative and policy committee will be meeting 100% virtually on Thursday, May 29th. So obviously all of these things will be coming out. Any commissioner is welcome to participate in any of them. As always, we also have our financial reports in the back. You're definitely welcome to ask me or Scott now or after the meeting on any of those. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Kate? Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to discuss tonight? Yeah.
adjournments for the good of the order.
All right, I'm not seeing any. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?